You know, you think you know your own children. You spend a lifetime raising them, you memorize the sound of their laughter, the shape of their dreams, and you think that bond is made of steel. You're wrong. It can be made of glass, and you won't even know it until you hear the sound of it shattering at your feet. For me, that sound was the silence in my daughter's perfect, marble-floored foyer on her 45th birthday. It all started with a cake. Not just any cake, but a 4-layer red velvet cake from a little artisanal bakery an hour's drive away in downtown Charlotte. It cost a small fortune, nearly $200, a splurge I had to budget for, but it was tradition. My late husband, Tom, started it for Brenda's 10th birthday, and I kept it going every single year after he passed. It was our thing. The drive to her neighborhood was always a bit of an experience. You pass through a set of imposing brick gates into a world of sprawling green lawns and houses that look more like corporate retreats than family homes. Brenda and her husband, Mark, lived in a pristine, white, modern farmhouse at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was beautiful, I'll give her that. It was also a house I'd put $150,000 down on so they could have it. But that's a detail for later. I remember my hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart was doing this hopeful little flutter. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe she'd finally see me, really see me, and not just the source of the next bank transfer. I pulled into the driveway, carefully lifting the heavy cake box from the passenger seat. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and money. I rang the bell, and after a moment, the heavy oak door swung open, and there was Brenda. She looked perfect, as always. Not a single strand of her professionally highlighted hair was out of place. She was wearing this cream-colored cashmere lounge set that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. But her face, oh, her face. There wasn't a flicker of warmth, just a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, her voice flat, "you're early." She didn't move to hug me. She just stepped aside, gesturing me in as if I were a delivery person. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, trying to inject some joy into the sterile space. I held out the cake. I got it, the red velvet, just like always. Brenda glanced at the box with a look of profound indifference. "Oh, right, thanks." She took it from me and set it on the huge granite island in her kitchen with a soft thud. She didn't even open it. "You know, you really don't have to do that anymore." "And it." "Of course I do, it's tradition," I said with a laugh that felt hollow in that cavernous room. She turned to face me then, leaning back against the counter, and gave me a look that I can only describe as pitying. "Mom, you know, Dad only started buying that cake because he felt guilty for missing all my school plays for his business trips. It was a guilt cake." She paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "Funny you decided to keep that tradition going." And just like that, she took a beautiful memory, a thread that connected me to her and to her father, and she poisoned it, right there in her perfect, silent kitchen. I just stood there, my car keys digging into my palm, feeling the chill of her words seep into my bones. I had no idea that was just the appetizer. The main course of her cruelty was yet to be served. I just stood there, my car keys digging into my palm, feeling the chill of her words seep into my bones. She had taken a memory I cherished, a thread that connected me to her and to her father, and she'd poisoned it, right there in her perfect, silent kitchen. I had no idea that was just the appetizer. The main course of her cruelty was yet to be served. I must have looked as stunned as I felt, because for a moment, Brenda's expression softened into something that looked vaguely like concern, but it was just a mask. She quickly pasted on a businesslike smile. "Look, Mom, let's go sit down. We need to talk." "Talk!" I managed to croak out, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Brenda, what was that about?" "It's nothing," she said, waving a dismissive hand as she led me from the kitchen into her living room. The room was breathtaking, I suppose. It looked like a page from an interior design magazine, all white couches, abstract art, and glass tables. It was also completely lifeless. There were no family photos, no clutter, no hint that actual human beings, let alone children, lived there. We sat on opposite ends of a long white sofa that felt a mile long. She folded her hands in her lap, like a CEO about to deliver some bad news to an underling. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she began, her tone measured and calm. "About my life, about what I want, about what's holding me back." I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. This was usually the preamble to a request for a large sum of money, a kitchen remodel, a new SUV, a family vacation to the Caribbean. I steeled myself, my mind already calculating what I could pull from my retirement accounts. "Of course, honey. Whatever you need, you know I'm always here to help. Was it that new Lexus you were talking about? We could go look at them this weekend. Or maybe that trip to Italy you wanted? Your father always wanted to take you." I was babbling, desperately trying to throw money at the problem, because that was the only language she seemed to understand anymore. "Brenda, let me finish." A small, unreadable smile playing on her lips. She let the silence stretch out, enjoying the power of it. Then she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. There was no anger in them. No sadness. There was nothing, and that was the most terrifying part. "The one thing I'd love most as a birthday present," she said slowly, savoring each word like a piece of expensive chocolate. "The one thing that would truly make me happy." I held my breath, waiting for the number. "Is for you to just die." The world didn't just stop. It ceased to exist. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The soft ticking of a minimalist clock on the wall became a deafening roar, then faded into a complete, ringing silence. I could see her mouth moving, but I couldn't hear any sound. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. My daughter, my baby girl, my Brenda, had just wished me dead. "What?" The word was a puff of air, a ghost of a sound. "What did you say?" I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that I had misheard, that a stroke was playing tricks on my mind, anything but the reality of those words. She didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, almost bored. "You heard me, Mom," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. I'm tired. I'm tired of the constant calls, the pop-in visits, the feeling that I always owe you something. My life would be so much simpler, so much freer, if you were just gone." My hands started shaking, a violent tremor that ran up my arms. 72 years I'd been on this earth, 45 years I'd been her mother. I had changed her diapers, held her through fevers, clapped the loudest at her graduations, and paid for the wedding of her dreams. And it all came down to this: I was a burden. An obstacle to her freedom, whose only solution was my death. I gave you everything," I stammered, tears finally blurring her cold, perfect face. "Exactly," she said, standing up now, smoothing down her cashmere sweater. "And it's suffocating. I can't breathe with you always there, always needing to be the center of everything. I need you to let me go. Permanently." I got up from the sofa, my legs feeling like they were made of sand. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't see the face of my child and reconcile it with the monster who had just spoken. I walked toward the door in a daze. I didn't grab my purse. I didn't say goodbye. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard her call out one last time, "And Mom, don't forget to have the title for the lake house transferred to my name, like we discussed. Just in case." I drove home, but I don't remember a single turn I made. All I knew was that my daughter had just killed the mother I used to be, and I had no idea who was going to wake up in my place. I drove home, but I don't remember a single turn I made. The familiar streets of my quiet neighborhood looked like a foreign country. All I knew was that my daughter had just killed the mother I used to be, and I had no idea who was going to wake up in my place. When I finally stumbled into my condo, the silence was a physical weight. I dropped my keys on the small entryway table, my hand still shaking so badly it took 3 tries. My gaze fell on the silver-framed photo sitting there. It was of Brenda and me, taken at her wedding. We were both smiling, her in a princess gown that cost a fortune, me with tears of joy in my eyes. I looked so happy, so proud, so clueless. With a slow, deliberate movement, I reached out and turned the frame face down. I couldn't look at that woman anymore. I didn't know her. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I just sat on my old chintz sofa, the one Brenda always said I should replace, and stared into the darkness. Her words played on a sickening loop in my mind. The greatest gift is for you to just die. It wasn't the anger in her voice that haunted me, it was the complete lack of it. It was a simple statement of fact. A business proposal. My existence was an inconvenience, and my death was the solution. Hour after hour ticked by. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I cried until my eyes were swollen shut and my throat was raw. I mourned my daughter as if she had died, because in a way, she had. The little girl who made me daisy chains and wrote me misspelled "I love you" notes was gone, replaced by a cold-eyed stranger in a cashmere sweater. It must have been around 3 a.m., in that dead, quiet hour when the whole world is asleep, that something else began to surface through the fog of my pain. It was her last comment, the one she tossed over her shoulder as I was leaving. "Don't forget to have the title for the lake house transferred to my name, like we discussed. Just in case. Just in case." Just in case her birthday wish came true. That single thought was like a bucket of ice water to the face. The grief, so hot and all-consuming, suddenly began to cool, crystallizing into something else, something hard and sharp. Anger. A pure, cold, clarifying anger. My daughter wasn't just cruel. She was a vulture, already calculating how to pick over my corpse before I was even gone. I stood up, my body moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I walked into my small home office and flipped on the desk lamp. In the back of the closet, behind the vacuum cleaner, were 4 heavy file boxes. On the side of each, I had written in my neatest cursive, "Brenda, the Book of Love." For years, I'd kept every receipt, every canceled check, every bank statement related to my daughter. Not out of suspicion, but out of a sort of foolish pride. It was my private record of how much I loved her, how much I had provided for her. Tonight, it wasn't a book of love. It was a book of evidence. I hauled the boxes out and opened the first one. On top was a pristine leather-bound ledger. I opened it to the first page and began to write. My hand, which had been trembling just an hour before, was now perfectly steady. First, the wedding. I found the folder. The receipt for the ballroom at the Myers Park Country Club, $35,000. The bill from the floral designer, $8,000. The invoice for her designer gown, $7,500. A check to the caterer for $12,000. Total, $62,500. I remembered her hugging me, crying with joy, telling me I was the best mother in the world. I wrote the number down. Next, the house. I found the bank statement from 10 years ago, a wire transfer from my life savings account to an escrow company. The description simply read, "Miller Residence Down Payment." The amount, $150,000. My entire nest egg, gone in a single click, so she could have a home in the right school district. I wrote it down. On and on it went, for hours. I dug through the boxes, the rustle of paper, the only sound in the condo. Private high school tuition for the twins, $28,000 a year for the last 4 years. That's $112,000. The check I wrote to pay off her husband Mark's car loan when he was between jobs, $22,000. The endless charges from Neiman Marcus and Nordstrom on the credit card I paid for emergencies, at least $5,000 a year. I tallied up the family vacations I'd funded, the country club dues, the summer camps, the constant $500 loans that were never, ever repaid. Each number was a fresh cut. Each receipt was a small, paper-thin monument to my own stupidity. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through my window, I was done. I picked up my old calculator, the kind with the big buttons, and began to add up the columns. The soft click-clack of the keys was like a drumbeat. When I finally hit the total button, I stared at the number on the little screen. $684,720. Over $500,000. Nearly $700,000 that I had poured into a black hole of entitlement. Money I could have used to travel, to live in a nicer home, to retire without worry, to have a life of my own. The tears were gone now. There was nothing left to cry about. Staring at that number, I felt something shift deep inside me. The soft, pliable heart of a mother who would do anything for her child hardened into something unbreakable. I realized Brenda was right about one thing. The mother, she knew the foolish, endlessly giving, emotional doormat did need to die. And in her place, someone who understood the value of $1 and the cost of everything was finally born. And in her place, someone who understood the value of $1 and the cost of everything was finally born. The sun was streaming through my window now, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. I was exhausted, but I was also wide awake for the first time in my life. The cold fury was a solid thing inside me, a core of steel where my soft heart used to be. But with it came a vast, terrifying emptiness. I had a staggering number on a piece of paper and a lifetime of lies to confront. I knew I couldn't do it alone. There's only one person I've ever been able to call when my world falls apart. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over her name for a second before I pressed the button. She answered on the second ring, her voice as brisk and sharp as a Carolina morning. "Maggie Chen, CPA, at large. What's the emergency?" she said. It was her standard greeting. "Maggie," I whispered, and my voice cracked, shattering into a million pieces. The humor in her voice vanished instantly, replaced by a laser-focused concern. "Carol? What is it? You sound terrible. What's happened?" "It's Brenda," I sobbed, the words tumbling out now. "Oh, Maggie, it's bad. Stay put. Don't move. I'm on my way." The line went dead. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Maggie standing there, still in her power-walking gear, a grim, determined look on her face. Maggie is a force of nature, a tiny, 73-year-old woman with the energy of a hummingbird and the mind of a hawk. She took one look at my swollen eyes, the file boxes littering my living room floor, the open ledger on my desk, and she understood. She didn't say a word. She just walked past me, into my kitchen, and started making coffee. As the rich, dark smell filled my condo, I finally let it all out. I told her everything. The dismissive look, the cruel comment about the guilt cake, the cold, lifeless living room, and then the words themselves, the birthday wish. I watched her face as I spoke, saw her expression harden from concern into a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. When I finished, she handed me a steaming mug of coffee, her movements precise and calm. "That ungrateful narcissistic parasite," she said, her voice dangerously low. "I always knew she was a user, but this is a new level of evil. I just don't understand how this happened," I cried, clutching the warm mug like a lifeline. "I gave her everything. I was a good mother." Maggie sat down opposite me at my small kitchen table. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her dark eyes never leaving my face. Her next words were not the comforting platitudes I was expecting. They were kind, but they were also incredibly sharp. "Carol, I love you like a sister," she said softly. "But you're wrong. This didn't just happen. You and I have been having versions of this conversation for 20 years, and you need to see your part in it." I recoiled as if she'd slapped me. "My part? Maggie, did you hear what I said?" She wished me dead. "I heard you," she said, her voice unwavering. "And it's monstrous. But monsters aren't born, Carol. They're made. Tell me, what happened 3 years ago when Mark's commission check was late, and Brenda called you crying because they couldn't make their mortgage payment?" I covered it for them," I admitted. "I didn't want them to lose the house. And what did I tell you?" I looked down into my coffee cup, the memory stinging. "You told me to let them figure it out. You said they were adults. And what about that family cruise to Alaska 2 years ago?" She continued, relentless. "The one they put on a credit card they couldn't afford and then you ended up paying off?" "They wanted the kids to have the experience," I mumbled, feeling the weakness of my own excuses. "They wanted a luxury vacation they didn't earn." Maggie leaned forward, her eyes boring into me. "This didn't just start with Brenda taking, Carol. It started with you giving when you should have been teaching. You built this cage for yourself, one check at a time." Her words hurt more than Brenda's, in a way, because they felt true. The final wall of my denial began to crumble. I thought about my late husband, Tom, a good man, a great provider, but emotionally, he was a ghost. Always at the office, always on a business trip. His love language was a checkbook. He'd taught it to me, and I, in turn, had taught it to our daughter. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The tears started again, But these were different. They weren't for Brenda anymore. They were for me. For the years I had spent trying to fill the emotional void in my marriage, and then in my widowhood, with money. I was buying her love, Maggie, I confessed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. After Tom died, I was so lonely. I was so afraid of losing her too, so I just kept writing checks. I thought if I gave her a perfect life, she wouldn't leave me. You weren't buying her love, Maggie said gently, her voice softening now that the truth was finally out. You were paying her to stay, and the price just kept going up. I looked up from my cup, my eyes meeting hers. The shame was still there, but beneath it, something else was taking root, a flicker of resolve. The fog of my grief and self-pity was beginning to clear. You're right, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. I helped create this, so it's my job to uncreate it. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed my coffee cup aside. Okay, what do we do first? I looked up from my cup, my eyes meeting hers. The shame was still there, but beneath it, something else was taking root. A flicker of resolve. The fog of my grief and self-pity was beginning to clear. You're right, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. I helped create this, so it's my job to uncreate it. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed my coffee cup aside. Okay, what do we do first? A small, grim smile touched Maggie's lips. It was the smile of a chess master who sees the entire board. First, she said, standing up and grabbing the coffee pot, we get a refill. Then, we go to war. We moved from the kitchen to my small home office. The space, which hours before had felt like a tomb of sad memories, was instantly transformed into a command center. I cleared off my desk, leaving only one thing in the center under the bright lamplight: the ledger, my so-called book of love. It was no longer a symbol of my affection. It was our primary intelligence document. Right, Maggie began, pulling a legal pad and a pen from her purse. She was all business now, the retired CPA in her element. Forget the emotion for a minute, Carol. We need to look at this like an audit. We identify the liabilities, cut off the losses, and then we liquidate the bad assets. It was harsh language, but it was exactly what I needed. For the first time, this overwhelming mess felt like a problem that could be solved. First, we stop the bleeding, she said, her pen scratching furiously on the pad. Immediate cash flow. What joint accounts do you have? What credit cards is she an authorized user on? List them, all of them. Be vended it. I spent the next hour pulling up bank statements on my computer and digging through my file cabinet. The list was sickening. There was the main joint checking account I'd set up for their household emergencies, which apparently included monthly charges for wine clubs and spa days. There was the Visa card I paid off every month, the one Brenda used for all her online shopping. It was a web of financial lifelines, all leading directly from my retirement savings to her curated lifestyle. Okay, Maggie said, drawing a thick line under the list. First thing tomorrow morning, you are walking into that bank and closing every single one of those accounts. You are removing her name from every card. You cut off the supply line. That's step one. No discussion, no warning. It's done. I nodded, a tremor of fear running through me, but I pushed it down. Okay, step one. Step two. The major assets, she continued, flipping to a new page. The house. You told me you co-signed their mortgage after Mark lost that big account last year, on top of the down payment you gave them. Yes, I said. The bank wouldn't approve their refinancing without my name on it. Maggie's eyes lit up with a strategic fire. Carol, that's it. That's our leverage. A co-signer has rights, especially a co-signer who has a documented history of making payments on their behalf, which you have. We can use that. And what's this about a lake house? It was my parents' old place, I explained. Brenda's been trying to get me to sign it over to her for years. She said it was part of her inheritance. It's not an inheritance until you're dead, Maggie said flatly. And after her birthday wish, she can forget about it. She wrote secure lake house deed and underlined it twice. Step 3. Protect your future, she said, her voice softening slightly. Your will, your life insurance, your investment accounts. She's the beneficiary on all of them, isn't she? And Kay. I nodded, feeling sick. The irony was suffocating. The daughter who wished me dead stood to gain everything from it. That changes tomorrow, too, Maggie said. We are expunging her name from your afterlife. As she spoke, I could feel the sheer scale of the task ahead. This wasn't just a matter of changing a few account numbers. It was a complex legal demolition of the life I had built. Maggie, I can't do all this myself. The mortgage, the will, I don't know the first thing about any of it. I know, she said, putting her pen down. That's why we're not doing it alone. We need a shark. She tapped her chin, thinking, I know a guy. Arthur Davies. He's a semi-retired estate lawyer. He's not cheap, and he doesn't have a warm bedside manner, but he treats financial abuse of seniors like a personal insult. He's exactly the bulldog we need. She looked at me, her expression serious. But I need to know, Carol. What's your end goal here? Is it just to cut her off, or is it more than that? I thought for a long moment, looking at the ledger, at the nearly $700,000 that represented a lifetime of one-sided sacrifice. My goal, I said, my voice low and clear. I want back what's mine. And I don't just mean the money. I want her to stand on her own 2 feet and see what the real world looks like without my safety net. I want her to understand, for once in her life, that actions have consequences. Maggie nodded slowly, a look of profound respect in her eyes. Good, she said. That's a goal worth fighting for. She picked up her phone. I'm calling Arthur's office right now to get you an appointment for Monday. As I listened to the murmur of her voice, I opened my laptop and typed First National Bank branch hours into the search bar. The screen glowed in the dim light of the office. 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I would be there when the doors opened. For the first time in 45 years, I wasn't thinking about what would make Brenda happy. I was thinking about what was just. We had a plan. We were about to have a lawyer, and for the first time since my daughter wished me dead, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever: power. For the first time in 45 years, I wasn't thinking about what would make Brenda happy. I was thinking about what was just. We had a plan. We were about to have a lawyer. And for the first time since my daughter wished me dead, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever: power. The weekend was the strangest 2 days of my life. I didn't hear a word from Brenda, and I didn't reach out. It was a cold, silent war, and I spent the time preparing. On Monday morning, I woke up before my alarm. I stood in front of my closet and pushed past the soft cardigans and floral print blouses I usually wore. Instead, I chose a pair of crisp navy trousers, a silk shell, and a structured blazer I hadn't worn in years. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked less like a retired nurse and more like a woman on her way to a corporate board meeting. It felt like a suit of armor. I was at the bank 10 minutes before the doors opened. I walked in, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my steps were steady. The branch manager, a man named David Harrison who had known me for years, saw me and smiled warmly. "Carol, good morning. What can we do for you today?" "Cashing in the retirement fund to take that world cruise, I hope," he said with a friendly chuckle. "Something like that, David," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I have a few accounts I need to restructure. Could we speak in your office?" His smile faltered slightly at my serious tone, but he led me back to his glass-walled office. I sat down and slid a piece of paper across his polished desk. On it were 2 account numbers. "This joint checking account," I began, pointing to the first number. "I need to close it, effective immediately. Please transfer the entire balance. It should be around $25,000 into my personal savings account." David's eyebrows shot up. "Close it? Carol, this is the emergency fund you set up for Brenda and her family? Are you sure?" "Perfectly," I said, meeting his gaze without blinking. "And this credit card," I pointed to the second number. "I need to remove my daughter, Brenda Miller, as an authorized user. Please cancel her card today." He leaned back, a look of genuine confusion on his face. "Carol, is everything all right? If there's some kind of financial trouble, we have programs we can—" "My financial arrangements are changing, David," I said, cutting him off gently but firmly. It was the first time I'd ever used his first name so directly. "That's all. Please proceed." Won him. He stared at me for a long moment, then seemed to realize this was not a negotiation. He turned to his computer, and with a few quiet clicks, it was done. He slid the final transfer receipt across the desk to me. Seeing that balance, safe and sound in my account, felt like taking my first breath of clean air after years of drowning. I walked out of that bank feeling 2 inches taller. The rest of the day was an exercise in suspense. I knew the call was coming. Every time my phone vibrated with a notification, I flinched. I tried to read a book, but I just stared at the same page for an hour. I was a soldier in a trench, waiting for the inevitable bombardment to begin. It came at 4:15 p.m. The phone rang, and the screen lit up with her name. Brenda. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep, steadying breath, and answered. "Hi, Mom," she said. There was no warmth, just a clipped, annoyed tone. Something weird is going on. I was just at the club trying to pay for the kids' tennis lessons, and my card was declined. "Oh?" I said, my voice a placid lake of calm. "Yes, oh," she snapped. It was embarrassing. I had to put it on Mark's Amex. "Did you forget to pay the bill or something?" "It's the 3rd. It's always due on the 1st. The accusation was clear in her voice. This was my fault. I had failed in my duties. I took a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. I could hear her breathing impatiently on the other end. "No, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I didn't forget." "What do you mean? You didn't forget? Then what happened? Did the bank make a mistake?" "There was no mistake," I said. I stood up and walked to my living room window, looking out at the peaceful afternoon. "Your financial arrangements have changed." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears in her mind grinding, trying to process a reality she had never once considered. What does that even mean?" she sputtered, but I didn't answer. With a steady hand, I pressed the red end call button. The silence after I hung up was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The first shot had been fired, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that there was no going back. The silence after I hung up was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The first shot had been fired, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that there was no going back. My phone immediately began to buzz, a frantic, angry vibration on the countertop. I glanced down. 3 missed calls from Brenda, then the texts started flooding in. A rapid-fire series of blue bubbles filled with indignant questions and demands. "What does that mean? Did you cancel my card?" "Mom, answer me right now." I watched the screen light up with her name a 4th, a 5th, a 6th time. Then, with a sense of calm that felt utterly foreign, I picked up the phone, pressed the side button until the power-off slider appeared, and swiped my finger across the screen. The device went dark. The buzzing stopped. The next morning, Maggie drove me to my 10 o'clock appointment with Arthur Davies. His office was in a stately old brick building uptown, filled with dark wood, leather-bound books, and the quiet, intimidating hum of serious money. Mr. Davies himself was exactly as Maggie had described. He was a man in his late 70s with sharp, intelligent eyes, a perfectly tailored suit, and an expression that suggested he had zero time for nonsense. I sat across from his enormous mahogany desk and, for 20 minutes, I told him everything. I didn't cry. I didn't get emotional. I just laid out the facts, with my ledger, my book of love, open between us as evidence. He listened without interruption, his gaze occasionally flicking down to the staggering numbers I had compiled. When I finished, he steepled his fingers and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "In my 45 years of practicing law, I have found that there are 2 things people are surprisingly careless with: their hearts and their money. It seems your daughter took advantage of both." He picked up the mortgage agreement I'd brought. "Your position as co-signer, given the primary borrower's documented employment instability and your own history of covering their payments, gives you significant leverage. You are well within your legal rights to force a resolution, which would likely mean the sale of the property to protect your investment." He said it so matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather. His lack of shock was profoundly comforting. He wasn't just on my side, he was on the side of common sense. Your daughter, he concluded, a flicker of something cold in his eyes, made a grave financial miscalculation. Leaving his office, I felt a weight lift that I didn't even know I was carrying. It was the weight of doubt. Now, I had a plan, and I had the law on my side. But as Maggie and I drove home, I realized something else. Cutting Brenda off, even taking back the house, wasn't enough. As long as I was in Charlotte, I would still be her mother. I would still be a character in her story, a ghost in her life. She would find ways to haunt me, to make my life a living hell. I needed to truly disappear, just like she wanted. "I'm leaving, Maggie," I said quietly, watching the familiar scenery pass by. "Leaving? What, for a vacation? Good for you." "No," I said. "For good." That evening, I sat down at my computer, the decisions settling into my bones. My late husband, Tom, and I had always dreamed of selling everything and moving to the Pacific Northwest. We'd had brochures of the Oregon coast taped to our refrigerator for years. Life, as it always does, got in the way. Brenda's college, her wedding, her children. There was always another reason to stay, another check to write, but not anymore. The next few days were a blur of motion. I started to pack up my condo, and it was the most painful and liberating thing I have ever done. I went through 45 years of memories, deciding which ones to keep and which ones to bury. I found a box of Brenda's old report cards, all straight A's. I put them in a trash bag. I found a macaroni necklace she made me for Mother's Day in 1988. Trash bag. I found photo albums filled with her cheerleading pictures, her prom photos, her graduation. I closed them and put them in a box labeled Donate. Each item I discarded was like pulling a thorn from my own heart. But I kept some things. A small, faded photo of Brenda as a toddler, maybe 3 years old, her face smeared with chocolate and lit up with a genuine, uncomplicated smile. I kept a picture of Tom and me on our own wedding day, young and full of foolish dreams. And I kept that silver-framed photo from Brenda's wedding. I took the picture out, cut my own smiling face out of it with a pair of scissors, and threw the rest of her perfect day away. I tucked the small, cropped image of myself into my wallet. It was time to remember who I was. Finally, on Thursday night, with my condo nearly empty and smelling of cardboard boxes, I performed the last ritual. I opened my laptop, went to the airline's website, and typed in my details. From Charlotte, NC, to Portland, OR. I selected a date for the following week, and then I clicked the button for a one-way ticket. My finger hovered over the Confirm Purchase button for a long second. This was it. This was the real point of no return. With a final, steadying breath, I clicked. My whole life had been about building a home for my family. Now, for the first time, I was leaving a house to finally find a home for myself. I didn't know a single soul in Portland, Oregon, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. My whole life had been about building a home for my family. Now, for the first time, I was leaving a house to finally find a home for myself. I didn't know a single soul in Portland, Oregon, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. The day I was scheduled to leave was a Tuesday. My flight was at 3 in the afternoon. At noon, my phone chimed with a text from Maggie. En route to the Lion's Den. Wish me luck. I texted back a single word, justice. My 2 suitcases were waiting by the door of my now hollow-sounding condo. All I could do was sit on a cardboard box and wait for the signal that the final, irreversible step had been taken. Maggie told me everything that happened later, describing the scene with the crisp, detailed recall of a star witness. She pulled her sensible sedan up to the curb in front of Brenda's perfect modern farmhouse, the very picture of a friendly, neighborly visit. She walked up the stone pathway, her expression placid, but in her hand she carried a large, thick manila envelope that felt as heavy as a gravestone. Brenda answered the door, a cordless phone tucked under her ear. She was in the middle of a conversation, looking irritated. When she saw Maggie, her eyes narrowed with suspicion and contempt. "What do you want?" she said, not bothering to cover the phone's receiver. "Hello, Brenda," Maggie replied, her voice pleasant and even. "I won't take up your time. Carol asked me to deliver a message." She held out the thick envelope. Brenda looked from Maggie's impassive face to the package, a flicker of something annoyance, fear, in her eyes. She snatched it from Maggie's hand. "Fine," she muttered, and started to close the door. "I'd open it now if I were you," Maggie said, her voice stopping Brenda in her tracks. "Carol wanted to make sure you received it personally." With a resentful sigh, Brenda tore open the clasp of the envelope right there in her marble-floored foyer. Maggie said she watched as Brenda's entire composure, the carefully constructed facade of the perfect suburban wife, was dismantled, document by devastating document. The first paper she pulled out was a single, professionally printed page from the offices of Arthur Davies, attorney at law. It was a formal notification that I, Carol Thompson, had executed a new last will and testament. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that all previous wills were now null and void, and that my entire estate was to be left to the Cardiac Nursing Education Fund at my old hospital. Maggie said Brenda's mouth fell open slightly, a small, shocked O. The next documents were copies of change of beneficiary forms. One for my life insurance policy, one for my retirement annuities. Brenda's name had been neatly crossed out, replaced by the same charitable fund. The 7-figure inheritance she had been banking on her entire adult life had just vanished in a puff of legally binding smoke. But that was nothing compared to the next letter. It was another one from Mr. Davies, but this one was thicker, filled with intimidating legal jargon. Maggie said Brenda's eyes scanned the page, her breath catching. I knew the words by heart. Exercising her legal rights as co-signer. Protecting her significant financial investment, due to the documented instability of the primary borrower's income. And then, the final brutal paragraph, which initiated a legal process to force the sale of the property at 122 Magnolia Way. Brenda's hand began to shake. The house, the very foundation of her perfect life, the stage for her social standing, was being pulled out from under her. She looked up at Maggie, her face ashen, her eyes wild with disbelief. "This is a joke," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is some kind of sick, twisted joke." "There's one more page," Maggie said calmly. Brenda looked down at the last sheet in the envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was a simple, one-page summary from my ledger. At the top, it read, "An accounting of a mother's love, 1,980 to 2,025. Below was an itemized list: wedding, house down payment, college tuition, decades of support, and at the very bottom, in bold, was the final, staggering total, $684,720. And scrawled underneath it, in my own familiar cursive, were 3 final words: "Paid in full." That, Maggie said, was when the terror finally set in. It was the realization that this wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't a tantrum, it was an ending. It was a final, meticulously documented accounting of a lifetime of taking, and the bill had finally come due. "What is this?" Brenda shrieked, the documents trembling in her hand. "You can't do this. She can't do this." Maggie just gave her a cool, level look. "It's not a joke, Brenda. It's an audit." She turned to leave. "Have the life you've made for yourself." Just as she reached her car, my phone vibrated in my empty condo. It was a text from Maggie. "Delivery made." I stood up, picked up my suitcase, and took one last look around the rooms that held so much of my past. Maggie's text was the period at the end of a 4-5-year-long sentence. There were no more chapters to write. As I closed the door on my old life, I knew Brenda was, at that very moment, reading the epilogue. As I closed the door on my old life, I knew Brenda was, at that very moment, reading the epilogue. The flight to Portland was like a journey into a different dimension. As the plane climbed, leaving the meticulously planned suburbs of Charlotte behind, I felt the physical weight of my 72 years of history fall away. I didn't watch a movie or read a book. I just stared out the window at the clouds, feeling like I was floating between one life and the next. When I landed, the air was cool and damp, and smelled of pine needles and rain, the scent of a new beginning. My new apartment was a small, furnished one-bedroom in a modern building in the South Waterfront District, with a wall of windows that overlooked the Willamette River. It was a third of the size of my old condo, but it felt infinitely larger. There were no ghosts here, no memories lurking in the corners. For 3 days, I just existed. I bought groceries. I walked along the river path, watching the boats glide by. I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea and felt the quiet settle into my soul. I had a new phone with a new Oregon number that only Maggie and Mr. Davies had. My old phone, my North Carolina life, lay dormant in a drawer, turned off, a sleeping dragon. On the 4th day, I knew it was time. I couldn't move forward if there was still a door, however small, open to the past. I took the old phone out, plugged it in, and after a moment, powered it on. The assault was immediate. A tidal wave of digital desperation. 97 text messages, 42 missed calls, 31 voicemails. It was a chronological record of Brenda's descent into panic. The first texts were furious. The next were pleading. The voicemails were a mix of threats of legal action, sobbing apologies, and bitter accusations. I didn't listen to a single one. I just watched the notifications pile up, a monument to her terror. I set the phone on the counter and waited. I knew she would have some kind of app or service that would notify her the second my phone was back on the network. It took less than 5 minutes. The screen lit up with her name. The dragon was awake. I took a deep breath, looked out at the steady gray-green flow of the river, and answered. I didn't say a word. Mom. The voice that came through the speaker was not my daughter's. It was a raw, ragged shriek, stripped of all its poise and polish. Oh my God, Mom, where are you? What have you done? I remained silent, listening. You're trying to ruin me. Is that it? You're trying to destroy my life. They're going to take our house, my children's home. The club has suspended our membership. The credit cards are all canceled. What are we supposed to do? The hysteria escalated, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and frantic sobs. The kids are a mess. They keep asking where their Nana is. They cry themselves to sleep. How could you do this to your own grandchildren? How could you be so selfish, so cruel? It was the performance of a lifetime, a masterclass in manipulation, hitting every note, the victim, the worried mother, the betrayed daughter. A year ago, a week ago, it would have shattered me. I would have been a torrent of apologies, promising to fix everything. But now, I just stood by my window, watching a lone seagull drift on the wind. I wasn't a participant in her drama anymore. I was just an audience member, watching the final act of a play I'd seen too many times before. She finally ran out of steam, her tirade dissolving into gasping, desperate sobs. Please, Mom, she whimpered. Please just come home. We can fix this. I'll do anything. In the ringing silence that followed, I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and clear. Brenda, I just have one question for you, I said. Are you upset that I'm gone, or are you upset that my money is gone? The silence that answered me was more damning than any confession. I could hear her breath hitch, the sound of a mind scrambling for a lie but finding none convincing enough. The question had hit the bedrock of truth, and there was simply nothing left to say. I didn't wait for the answer she could never give. You got your birthday wish, Brenda. I'm gone, I said softly. Have a good life. Goodbye. I ended the call. Then, with a few calm, deliberate taps, I opened my contacts, found her name, and pressed, block this caller. I did the same for her husband, Mark. I powered down the old phone for the final time and placed it back in the drawer. There was no satisfaction in her pain, only a deep, quiet relief in my own freedom. The ghost was exorcised. The line was dead, and for the first time, my new life could truly begin. The ghost was exorcised, the line was dead, and for the first time, my new life could truly begin. The next few weeks in Portland felt like learning to breathe again. I fell into a gentle rhythm that was entirely my own. I joined a walking group of women my age who were more interested in discussing books and bird-watching than country club gossip. I discovered a small coffee shop that knew my order by my 3rd visit. I even signed up for a pottery class, finding a strange, deep satisfaction in taking a shapeless lump of clay and turning it into something solid and real. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for decades began to dissolve in the soft Oregon rain. I was starting to feel happy. And that, of course, was when Brenda found a new way to attack. The blow didn't come via a phone call or a text, but through a cold, official email forwarded to me from Mr. Davies' office. The subject line was chilling. Urgent. Regarding a report filed with North Carolina Adult Protective Services. My hands trembled as I opened the attached PDF. It was a formal notice, a multi-page document detailing a complaint filed by my daughter, Brenda Miller. I read her words, and the tranquil peace of my new life shattered into a million pieces. She had constructed a horrifying, plausible narrative. She alleged that I, her loving mother, was suffering from a rapid onset of dementia or a similar cognitive decline. She cited my sudden and erratic financial decisions, my unexplained and abrupt relocation across the country, and my complete isolation from my family and support system. But the final line was the most venomous. She claimed I was likely under the undue and malicious influence of a third party, a clear and calculated strike against Maggie. Brenda wasn't just saying I was sick, she was trying to paint a legal picture of an incompetent old woman being manipulated, a woman who needed to be protected from herself. Protected, of course, by having her assets seized and placed under the control of a court-appointed guardian. The disgust that rose in me was so potent it was acidic. This wasn't a desperate plea. This was a calculated attempt to legally erase me, to strip me of my autonomy, my freedom, and my own mind, all to get her hands on my money. It was the ultimate betrayal, an act so profoundly evil I could barely comprehend it. My first call was to Arthur Davies. My voice was shaking, but this time with pure, white-hot rage. "Did you see this? Can she do this?" "I saw it," he said, his voice a pillar of calm in my storm. "And yes, she can try. This is a classic move for a thwarted heir, Mrs. Thompson. It's the crazy old parent defense. It's desperate, it's ugly, and frankly, it's pathetic. But don't worry, we are prepared for it." He was my anchor. He explained that the best way to fight this wasn't to fight it at all, but to cooperate with absolute transparency. "They want an evaluation? We will give them the most thorough evaluation they have ever seen," he said. "Her malice will be her undoing." A week later, I found myself in a quiet, professional office at the U.S. Consulate in downtown Portland, preparing for a remote cognitive assessment with a state-appointed neurologist in North Carolina. The irony was almost unbearable. I, a retired cardiac nurse who had spent 40 years reading charts and assessing patients' mental states, was now the one being asked if I knew what year it was and who the current president was. I answered every question with a calm, precise clarity that left no room for doubt. The call from Mr. Davies came 5 days later. I answered on the first ring. "Well, Carol," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "The report is in. You passed with what the doctor described as remarkable acuity. More importantly, the social worker assigned to the case has officially closed the investigation." He paused for effect. "The final report notes that the initial complaint was found to be factually baseless and likely malicious in its intent." I sank into a chair, the relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. I was vindicated. I was free. I was still me. The outrage I had felt for days cooled, hardening into something far more dangerous, an icy, diamond-hard resolve. Brenda had tried to take my money, and she had failed. Then she had tried to take my freedom, and she had failed. Now, she had tried to take my very mind. In doing so, she had finally given me the one thing I needed to end this for good, legal proof of her malice. In doing so, she had finally given me the one thing I needed to end this for good, legal proof of her malice. The very next morning, I was on the phone with Arthur Davies. The rage I had felt was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steady. "Brenda didn't just file a complaint. She knowingly filed a false report with a government agency with the explicit intent to have me declared incompetent so she could gain control of my assets. That's not just a family squabble, that's attempted fraud." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard the deep, satisfying rumble of Mr. Davies's chuckle. "Carol," he said, and I noted he'd finally dropped the formal Mrs. Thompson. "That is precisely what it is. And I was hoping you'd see it that way. I've already taken the liberty of drafting a civil complaint. defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attorney's fees. We won't get a fortune out of it, but that's not the point. The point is to make her actions a matter of public record, to hold her accountable in a way that can't be dismissed as a simple misunderstanding. File it, I said without a moment's hesitation. File it today. The lawsuit was a public document, and in a town like Charlotte, where reputation is everything, it was a social atom bomb. Maggie kept me updated, of course. She said the news. Filed in the county court and available for anyone to see, spread through the Myers Park Country Club like a wildfire. Suddenly, Brenda's perfect, curated life had a dark and ugly stain on it. The whispers started at the tennis courts, then moved to the clubhouse bar. People who had once fawned over her lavish parties were now crossing the street to avoid her. Her friends, who were really just admirers of the lifestyle I had funded, began to ghost her. The social edifice she had built her entire identity on was crumbling, brick by expensive brick. While her world was imploding, mine was quietly expanding. One lonely evening, I stumbled upon an online forum. It was a support group for parents of estranged adult children. For 2 nights, I just lurked, reading post after post. The stories were heartbreakingly similar to my own. Mothers who were treated like ATMs, fathers who were discarded when the money ran out, parents whose love was used as a weapon against them. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. There were thousands of us, all suffering in silence. On the 3rd night, I started to write. I didn't plan to. The words just started to pour out of me. I created an anonymous username, Oregon Rose 72, and I told my story, all of it. The lifetime of sacrifice, the birthday cake, the cruelest wish, the cold fury of the ledger, and the ultimate betrayal of the sanity report. I didn't hold back. I wrote about my shame, my complicity, and my long, painful journey to reclaim myself. It was the most honest I had ever been in my life. With a trembling finger, I hit post. I went to bed expecting nothing. I woke up to a revolution. My post had exploded. There were hundreds, then thousands, of comments. My inbox was flooded with private messages. The post had been shared across dozens of similar communities. The sheer volume of it was overwhelming, but the content was pure validation. A woman from Florida wrote, "I am reading my own life in your words. My son told me I was selfish for not selling my house to pay for his 3rd wedding. You've given me the courage to finally say no." A man from Texas commented, "My daughter cleaned out my bank account and called it an early inheritance. I thought I was a failure as a father. Thank you for showing me I was a victim of exploitation." Message after message, from all corners of the world, echoed the same sentiment. "Thank you. You are so brave." I thought I was the only one. There was on. I sat there, in my quiet Portland apartment, tears streaming down my face. But these were not tears of grief. They were tears of connection, of being seen. The lawsuit against Brenda was for legal justice. But this was for my soul. I had lost one daughter, but in sharing my story, I had found thousands of kindred spirits. My secret pain had become my public purpose, and that was a secret weapon Brenda could never have anticipated and could certainly never defeat. My secret pain had become my public purpose, and that was a secret weapon Brenda could never have anticipated and could certainly never defeat. The months that followed were a time of quiet rebuilding. My life in Portland took on a shape I never could have imagined. I became a moderator on the support forum, spending my mornings with a cup of coffee, offering advice and a listening ear to others who were navigating the same treacherous waters I had. The defamation lawsuit was moving forward slowly, a quiet, grinding machine of justice managed entirely by Mr. Davies. For the first time, I felt like I was the one in control. I had a new community, a new purpose, and a peace that was, for the most part, unshakable. And then, an email arrived that threatened to shake it all. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line was brutally direct, an explanation. Not an excuse, from Mark Miller. My first instinct was to drag it straight to the trash folder. What could he possibly have to say that wasn't another plea or a veiled threat? But I hesitated. My new life was built on confronting hard truths. I couldn't start hiding from them now. With a deep breath, I clicked it open. The email wasn't what I expected. It was long, and the tone was one of complete and utter defeat. "Carol," it began, "I know there is nothing I can say to fix what has been broken. The damage is done, and the fault is ours, mine included. I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness, and I am certainly not writing to ask for your money. I'm writing because, after everything, I believe you deserve to know the whole truth. What Brenda did was unforgivable. But it wasn't born from nothing. For the last 2 years, Brenda has been living a secret life. She was so desperate to have her own thing, as she called it, something to show her friends at the country club that she was more than just a wife and mother. She started an online children's clothing boutique. She called it Magnolia Bloom. She poured everything into it, convinced it would be the next big thing. She had a vision of luxury, of a certain kind of perfection that she could sell. But she had no business sense. The venture was a catastrophe from the start. She was spending thousands on marketing, on high-end fabrics, on web designers, and the sales were barely a trickle. Instead of admitting defeat, she just dug a deeper hole. She took out private business loans without my knowledge. She maxed out secret credit cards. She was chasing a fantasy, terrified of what people would think if she failed. Last summer, just before my own job situation became unstable, she finally confessed the extent of it to me. "Carol, they were on the verge of calling in her loans. The total debt was over $200,000. We were drowning. The pressure, the shame, it broke her. She became paranoid and resentful. And all that terror, all that rage at her own failure, she pointed it at you. In her twisted mind, you became both the source of her problems and the only possible solution. Your constant giving made her feel like a failure, but she was also addicted to it. She resented your help and was terrified of it ever disappearing. When she said those horrible words to you on her birthday, it was the sound of a person completely cracking under a pressure they created for themselves. I don't say any of this to excuse it. It was monstrous. I say it so you know it wasn't just simple greed. It was a pathetic, desperate, and ugly kind of desperation, and I have to own my part. I knew it was getting bad, and I let it happen. I was a coward. I was more afraid of her anger than I was of the debt collectors. I enabled her lies. We were cheating our way through a life we couldn't afford, and you were the one footing the bill for the illusion. The lawsuit papers arrived last month. I can't say we didn't deserve it. I just wanted you to have the whole story. Mark. I must have read the email 5 times. The simple, clean narrative I had constructed, the story of a good mother and a greedy, evil daughter, was suddenly flooded with messy, complicated, and pathetic details. The anger that had been my fuel for so long sputtered, replaced by a feeling I couldn't quite name. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even sympathy. Not really. It was a profound, hollow pity. The email didn't erase the cruelty, but it gave it a context. Brenda wasn't just a villain from a storybook. She was the author of her own spectacular tragedy, a woman so terrified of appearing imperfect that she had destroyed her own life and tried to destroy mine. The question was, now that I knew the whole, sad, and sordid story, did it change the ending I had written for her? The question was, now that I knew the whole, sad, and sordid story, did it change the ending I had written for her? I spent the next 2 days with that question as my constant companion. I walked for miles along the river path, watching the ceaseless, uncaring flow of the water, and I thought, Mark's email hadn't inspired forgiveness. The sheer scale of Brenda's deception and the cruelty it had spawned were too vast for that, but it had extinguished the last embers of my anger. It's hard to stay furious at a black hole. Brenda hadn't just tried to consume my life. She had consumed her own first. My anger was replaced by a profound, desolate sense of clarity. The story was no longer about punishing my daughter. Punishing someone so thoroughly broken felt like a pointless, cruel exercise. The story was now about protecting my grandchildren. They were the innocent survivors of a shipwreck their parents had steered directly into an iceberg of their own making. My focus shifted from the past to the future, from revenge to legacy. On the 3rd day, I called Arthur Davies. "Arthur, it's Carol Thompson," I said. "Carol, I was just reviewing the preliminary motions for the defamation suit. We have them on the ropes. Percent, I want you to drop it," I said quietly. There was a long pause. May I ask why? He finally said, his voice carefully neutral. Because it no longer serves a purpose, I explained. Her reputation is in tatters, a situation of her own making. To continue feels unnecessary. There is nothing left to win. However, there is something else I need you to do for me. I need you to draw up an ironclad, irrevocable trust. That got his attention. I spent the next hour laying out my final act as a matriarch. The trust was to be named the Thompson Educational Fund. The sole beneficiaries were my 2 grandchildren. The terms were ruthlessly specific. The funds were to be used exclusively for their higher education, college, trade school, graduate school, and medical emergencies. Upon turning 30, they would each receive a modest lump sum to be used for a down payment on a home or to start a business. And then I laid out the most important rule, the one that made the trust a fortress. Brenda and Mark were to have no access to the funds, ever. They could not be trustees, they could not be signatories, they could not petition for funds on behalf of the children. An independent financial institution would be the sole trustee, with Maggie Chen appointed as a trust protector to oversee everything. I was building a firewall between my grandchildren's future and their parents' failures. As we were finalizing the details, an email came through from Mr. Davies's office. It was a notice from the bank. The foreclosure on the Magnolia Way property was complete. The house had been sold at auction. And here's the final accounting, Arthur said, his voice laced with professional satisfaction. After the outstanding mortgage was paid, your initial co-signer investment of $150,000 has been fully recovered, plus an additional $22,000 in interest and damages. The funds will be wired to your account by the end of the week. And Juan is right. I looked out my window at the river. The house, the grand stage for Brenda's fantasy life, was gone. And the money I had poured into that fantasy, the money I had long considered lost forever, was coming back to me. I knew instantly what I had to do. Arthur, I said, that $172,000? That's the seed money. It's the first deposit into the children's trust. The symbolism was perfect. The money that had enabled a destructive life would now be transformed into the foundation for 2 new, hopefully better ones. A week later, I sat in a notary's office in downtown Portland and signed the thick stack of documents. Each stroke of my pen felt both heavy and incredibly light. It was my final act of maternal responsibility, my last move on a chessboard I had no desire to play on any longer. Signing those papers felt like the last page of my duties as Brenda's mother. I wasn't her savior or her enemy anymore. I was just a woman securing a future for 2 children I loved, from a safe and permanent distance. I was finally, truly, free. I was just a woman securing a future for 2 children I loved, from a safe and permanent distance. I was finally, truly, free. 3 years passed, not in the blink of an eye, but one quiet, deliberate day at a time. My anonymous post in the support forum grew into something much bigger. With the help of some of the other members, we established a nonprofit foundation, the Phoenix Project, dedicated to providing resources and legal aid for seniors facing family-based financial exploitation. I even wrote a book, a memoir titled The Ledger, which shared my story and offered a roadmap for others to reclaim their lives. At 75, I was busier and more fulfilled than I had ever been. I had a purpose that was entirely my own. Last week, on a crisp October afternoon, a letter arrived. The postmark was from Charlotte, but the handwriting was a boy's, on the verge of becoming a man's. It was from my grandson. Dear Grandma Carol, it read, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm 15 now, a freshman in high school. My sister is doing great in middle school. She's really into art. A lot has changed here. We moved to a much smaller house a few years ago. It's okay. Dad told us the truth about why you left. And he told us about the college fund you set up. He called it the most selfless gift he'd ever seen. I want you to know that I understand, and I'm not angry. I'm proud of you. I want to be a structural engineer someday, and because of you, I know I can do that. Mom is quieter now. She works at the local library. I think she's starting to understand things she didn't before. I love you, and I miss you. My dad said when I turn 18, I can make my own choices. My first choice will be to get on a plane to Portland. Love, your grandson. I folded the letter, my heart aching with a sweet, gentle kind of love that was no longer complicated by pain. My decision had been the right one. It had saved not just me, but them too. This past Friday, Maggie flew in for a visit. We were sitting on my balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the last of the autumn sun sparkle on the river. It was October 3rd, my 76th birthday. "Can you believe it's been 4 years since that horrible day?" I said, sipping my tea. "Some days it feels like a lifetime ago, other days, like yesterday," she replied. I reached out and put my hand on her arm. "I've said it 1,000 times, Maggie, but I'll say it again. I never could have done any of this without you. You didn't just give me advice, you saved my life." She was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "My mother was a widow too, you know," she said. "A kind, trusting woman who thought her children could do no wrong, especially my brother." I waited, knowing this was a story she had never told me. "My father didn't leave her much, just the paid-off house. My brother, he had dreams bigger than his wallet. He convinced my mother to take out a second mortgage to fund a can't-miss business venture. It missed." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "He drained what little she had left and then just disappeared. She lost the house. She spent her last 5 years in a state-run nursing home, ashamed to even see me because she felt like such a failure." She turned to look at me, and in her sharp, intelligent eyes, I saw a flicker of a pain that was decades old. "When she died, I stood at her graveside and I made a promise. I swore I would never, ever stand by and watch that happen to another woman I loved. So, when you called me that morning, Carol, your voice breaking over the phone, I wasn't just fighting for you, I was fighting for her." The breath caught in my throat. All her ferocity, her strategic brilliance, her unwavering loyalty. It wasn't just friendship, it was a promise. It was an act of redemption. I didn't say anything. I just squeezed her arm, and we sat there together in the fading light, 2 old friends who had weathered the worst of storms. Brenda had wished for my death as a birthday gift, and in a way, she'd gotten it. The woman I was, the timid, enabling doormat, died that day. But in her place, a new woman was born. One who learned that the most valuable thing you can own is your own peace, and that the greatest inheritance you can ever receive is a friend who will go to war for you and for the ghosts you both carry. Thank you for staying with me through my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I believe in the power of sharing our truths, no matter how painful they are. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my experience, it's this: you cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. For years, I confused financial support with love, and my own self-worth with my daughter's happiness. I learned, in the hardest way possible, that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but the ultimate act of self-respect. It's a declaration that you are worthy of peace, even if it means disrupting a toxic peace you've kept for someone else. I learned that no is a complete sentence, and that an apology without changed behavior is just a form of manipulation. For the privacy of everyone involved, I've changed some of the names and specific details in my story, but I can assure you that the emotions, the pain, and the lessons learned are entirely real. Now, I truly want to hear from you. My journey was my own, but I know I'm not the only one who has faced this kind of heartbreak. So I ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Have you ever reached a breaking point where you had to choose your own peace over a toxic family relationship? What did that look like for you? Please, share your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps us all feel a little less alone. Thank you for being a part of my new beginning. Please be kind to yourselves and to each other. With love and respect, Carol.